welcome to this speaker series program for the Jacksonville History Center. We'll get underway in just a moment, if you all wouldn't mind finding your way to your seats and make yourselves comfortable there. Thank you all and welcome again. I'm Alan Bliss. I'm CEO of the Jacksonville History Center. And those of you who have been hearing me welcome you to Old St. Andrews over the years may be accustomed to hearing me welcome you to the Jacksonville Historical Society. And that organization still exists, the nonprofit corporation still exists under that name, but for the last few years we have been rebranding ourselves as the Jacksonville History Center. How come? For two reasons. Number one, the term society seems to hint at exclusivity and being exclusionary, and that's not who we are, it's not what we do, and it's not what Jacksonville needs. Also, because instead of being an organization devoted just to collecting and preserving the archives and the artifacts and the memories of Jacksonville's story, instead of just being an organization devoted to programming, we are now a place, and the Jacksonville History Center is in the building for a long time known as the Florida Casket Company building. It's on our campus just 2 blocks west of here, on the other side of the ViStar Veterans Memorial Arena. The building underwent a year-long, $3.9 million renovation over the past year and a half. We received a certificate of completion from the City of Jacksonville on May 6th. We've begun activating the event space on the second floor of that building, and we're developing plans with a design consultant to fill the first floor with galleries and exhibits devoted to Jacksonville's history. It's an ambitious program. We have a budget, an ambitious capital budget set for executing on all those plans on that campus, and you'll be hearing more about that, especially as our designs take shape. We expect to have more information in hand by the end of the summer for that, so stay tuned for news to come. In the meantime, it's an honor to welcome everybody back here to Old St. Andrews Church. This deconsecrated Episcopal church dates from 1888. It was on the verge of demolition in the 1990s and underwent a major renovation and restoration of its own in the late 1990s. Thanks to a number of significant donors, benefactors, philanthropists, Dolores Barr-Weaver notable among them, but many others, the Contractors and Builders Association of Duval County, the committee for the renovation led by Council Member Matt Carlucci. This building and the fact that we can hold events here is a good reflection of a part of why we exist, which is to advocate for the preservation and the adaptive reuse of buildings that have historic significance and that have cool and interesting stories to tell. And man, does this church ever, as most churches do. You know, the old saying is, if these walls could talk, just think about all the baptisms, the weddings, the memorial gatherings, the hot, steamy Sunday morning worship services during the summertime before there was air conditioning. All of those stories and plenty more emerge from places like this. So it's an honor to be able to host a program here, and this evening's program devoted to Norman Studios reminds me of the late Rita Reagan. How many in the room remember Rita? A woman whose physical stature hid a giant. She was petite in stature, but she was a woman of tremendous heart and devotion and ambition, and it was her pioneering service and devotion that led Norman Studios to the position that it reached over just this past few years. Rita's no longer with us, but her memory will stick for a long time here in Jacksonville. Her story and Norman Studios' stories both are great Jacksonville stories. And here to hear more about that, we will be hearing momentarily from Jim Kerkhoff. Mr. Kerkhoff is an Emmy Award-winning producer and director who moved to Jacksonville from the Washington, D.C. area following his retirement in 2021. He was a lifelong film historian, And upon moving here, he immediately got involved with the Norman Studios Silent Film Museum, where he currently serves on that board of directors. And over the years, he has made numerous presentations detailing his research into the film history at the Library of Congress, at the American Film Institute, at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts, at Lincoln Center. He's also contributed to many publications written by fellow film historians, and he just recently authored his own book titled Hometown Tinsel. And Jim is now researching a second book that explores silent film era locations in and around Jacksonville, and he is reportedly amazed at what he's discovered about our city as it's reflected in films made here more than a century ago. It's fascinating, is it not, to think about the images captured in film that old. It's like we're holding up a telescope and looking through the big end of the telescope back into the past. An astonishing thing to experience. We'll hear more about that from Mr. Kerkhoff, and please join me in welcoming him. And thank you all for being here.
Hello, everybody. As Dr. Bliss mentioned, my name is Jim Kerkhoff, and I am here tonight representing the Norman Studios Silent Film Museum. For those of you who aren't aware of our organization, we're an all-volunteer nonprofit that works with the city in terms of running this museum that is dedicated to preserving Jacksonville's silent film legacy. Before I would start, Dr. Bliss mentioned Rita Reagan. I would like to do a shout out to Barbara Wingo. Barbara, could you raise your hand or stand up? Barbara is our current director. She worked with Rita for quite a number of years, getting this rolling. With Rita's passing, Barbara has stepped in and she puts in a ton of work for us. So I clap my hands, Barbara. I'm hoping you like this. So tonight, what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through the history of motion pictures in Jacksonville and the role that it played, and also the role that Jacksonville played in motion picture history. So I have my little controller here, and it all started way back when with a guy named Tom Edison. And Mr. Edison opened a laboratory in West Orange, New Jersey in 1887. Now at the time he was like 40 years old, and essentially he opens a lab. Where did he get the money? Did he win Mega Millions? Was it family money? No. Basically he was an inventor for many years. He worked as a telegraph operator, and he was the best telegraph operator in the United States. He basically analyzed the technology, made improvements to it, and filed patents for his improvements, which were incorporated into the telegraph system. While he was doing that, on the side, that one there, on the side he kind of, I don't know, invented the phonograph, which was, I mean, the first ever in mankind's history to record sound. He came up with the electric light bulb. It's basically, this is shining in my light. It's his invention. Less sexy is the carbon microphone, but what that did, it enhanced his phonograph invention. It also enhanced Alexander Graham Bell's telephone. So he was not a slacker by any means. So by the time 1889 rolled around, after those initial inventions, especially the electric light bulb, he spent about 7, 8, maybe 9 years helping build the power infrastructure to feed power to the light bulb. See, there was whole controversy whether it's direct current, alternating current. He was the direct current guy. He lost out to alternating current. But essentially, he did a lot of work on that end, but he's still thinking, what new inventions can I come up with when I have the time? So essentially in his lab in New Jersey, came up with the idea of recording moving images. And it wasn't just his idea. In France, there were the Lumiere brothers who were coming up with their own ideas. They invented a system that was a combination of a camera and a projector. Thomas Edison took a different track. He invented strictly a motion picture camera and then came up with a way of viewing them. So the motion picture camera was called a kinetograph camera. And that on the bottom is his assistant, Fred Ott, and in the first film ever, and all it was Fred sneezing. And so actually the Library of Congress has a paper print copyright of the sneeze. So it was first motion picture camera. The way to view those was a bit awkward though. His invention of the kinetoscope viewer, essentially, as you can see the woman on the right, you'd have to stand, hunch over this box, and watch this short film. It really wasn't conducive to enjoying a movie. Well, they really didn't have movies back then. It was just short clips of a train coming through a station, things along those lines. But still, it was very awkward. So, he came up with the first moving picture projector, standalone. It was called the kinetoscope projector, and this allowed an audience who was accustomed to going to vaudeville houses, sitting just as you're sitting, and enjoying a performance of actors, comedians, acrobats, things like that. Now they could sit together and watch a motion picture. And thanks to the wonderful people here at the Jacksonville History Center, Norman Studios has on exhibit permanently an original Edison kinetoscope. And a lot of our visitors come in and they just love looking at this. And basically it looks archaic, but it functions as a modern movie projector. It really is amazing. But so thank you, Jacksonville History Center, for this. Now he made these inventions for recording and projecting film. The next logical step was to start his own film studio. So from 1893 to 1903, in this contraption in the middle, he made very short films, many experimental, some for theatrical release. But the contraption, it was called the Black Maria because the people who worked for him, who worked in it, they named it, and the Black Maria was a nickname for police paddy wagons back then. They were very dark, there was no air in them, and they were musty, just not pleasant to be in. And that's basically what the studio was like. It was actually on kind of a large lazy Susan, and they would rotate the studio and lift that roof that you can see there and essentially direct the studio to where the sun was shining to capture the light. I mean, you can see the shadows on the dancer up top there. And so this was the start of a huge industry in the United States, motion picture exhibitions. It was like the Nickelodeons. You pay your nickel, you go in, you sit with everybody else and enjoy the show. So with Thomas Edison, he owned the patents to the camera, the projector, all that kind of wonderful stuff. So essentially it was logical that the motion picture industry formed around where he was located. So really the centers of the film industry, early film industry, were New York City, where they had access to professional actors from the stage. But back then it was more the professional actors would do this between more legitimate gigs because the movie industry back then was not really looked upon as being a good profession. So they do it on the side to make some money and then get back on stage in another production. And then Fort Lee, New Jersey, that was a center. And actually, Fort Lee, New Jersey was built as the film capital of the world. We were known as the winter film capital of the world, and I'll get into that. But in Fort Lee, I don't know if you're familiar with it, it's along the Hudson River, a lot of cliffs, a lot of nice scenery. So they did a lot of exterior shooting there. But the problem was, in the wintertime, you couldn't produce films. You couldn't go out and shoot films. It was cold, and there was snow on the ground. Even if the script called for snow scenes, you take the camera out, and it's very dry air, very cold air. It would create problems with the camera mechanism and actually on the film itself. They developed the film, and it would have lines through it like lightning because it was electrical static. So that wasn't working out. And then the shot in the middle is basically in New York City. They built these studios on rooftops to catch a light. So the film executives who own these small studios, in the wintertime, they would get out of town. They basically close up shop, come down to Florida, Jacksonville and St. Augustine, and essentially chill out for 3-4 months, but they're losing money because they can't work. But one of them, the way they come down would be train. More often than not, for these long vacations, they come down by steamer, which was like about a 3-day trip versus a 1-day trip on the train. It's a little more relaxing on the boat. So they come down, and what they would see would be beautiful city, brand new downtown area rebuilt from the 1901 fire, beautiful neighborhoods. They'd see a lot of foliage, beautiful parks, and there's the Atlantic Ocean. So it was great for just kind of kicking back. But one of them, a guy named Frank Marion, who owned a little company, not a little company, back then it was like one of the major motion picture producers, Kalem. He came down and he's looking around thinking, hey, this is nice. I could open up a studio down here and shoot films during the winter months. And that's exactly what he did. He rented the Roseland Hotel on Talleyrand, and it's just east of the stadium complex here, and it's a lot of foliage, a lot of trees, countryside. Today it's all industrialized. There's not a tree to be seen, so a lot has changed over the years. So he had this idea, he opens up shop, and all these other studio execs, they come along and they open up. And basically Kalem, when they came down, it was interesting, they didn't specialize, but one of their main product lines was storylines having to do with the Civil War from the Confederate perspective. So they shot a lot of these, and several of these short films still exist, and they're very intriguing to watch. But you can notice on the left, there's like a ballroom scene, but very harsh shadows. And that was caused because they built their sets on an open-air stage back in those days because Thomas Edison's electric light bulb wasn't quite there because you couldn't do it inside because the lighting would get very bright and it was very hot. So they did it outside, and what they had to come up with was a system to diffuse the harsh sunlight. And what they did was they built a retractable muslin awning that you could pull over the stage, and when the sun is too bright, basically it hits the muslin, which diffuses the light, spreads it evenly. So at one point in time, there were some 30 motion picture production companies permanently based here in Jacksonville, or at least with studios permanently based here in Jacksonville. A lot of these names are unfamiliar today. Lubin, Vim, I'll be talking about them in a little bit. Kalem I mentioned, but there was Seelig, Vitagraph, Gaumont, which was a French company, and Thanhauser Company, which had a studio up on 8th, right off of Main Street up in the Springfield section of town. So a lot of activity. Now Eagle Films is dear to all of us at Norman Studio Silent Film Museum because it was the Eagle Film Company that built the facility that now houses our museum. So Eagle Film Company was out of Chicago, another cold weather environment, and they made the decision to build this studio, and they did it upright. This was the state-of-the-art, the largest studio in all of Jacksonville. It consists of 5 buildings, all of which are now part of the museum. It all even had what they called a water feature, which was a big swimming pool, and that was designed to shoot water scenes. So it was very, very sophisticated, as sophisticated as some of the studios that were growing out in Los Angeles at the time. The problem was they were undercapitalized, and within the matter of a year, they went belly up. Even though they had the fellow on the bottom left, Marcel Perez, they had signed this comedian who came over from Europe, from Italy. He came over at the beginning of World War I because they closed down the film production business over in Europe as war raged. So he came, went to New York, and then everybody said, oh, Marcel, you have to go down to Jacksonville. That's where it's all happening. So he came down and he started a series of, I think it was 11 or 12 comedies. Surprisingly, 5 still exist. And they're out on DVD if you want to search for them. But they're very interesting. They're quite funny. They're very well done. But unfortunately, Eagle Film went belly up, and the facility sat vacant until 1924, when Richard Norman, who was local, born in Middleburg, Florida, a producer who traveled around the country shooting things, wanted to settle back. So 1924, which was past the heyday of Jacksonville's time as the winter film capital of the world by several years, but he wanted to come back, settle down, make his films here, and he was very interesting, very intriguing person. He made what were called race films. Obviously, he's a white man making films for theaters in black communities, and he did an awesome job. He did away with all of the really derogatory Jim Crow era racial stereotypes, wrote very serious scripts. He cast very professional black actors from the stage, and he produced, he wrote, he directed, he edited, he marketed these films. He must have been quite something. But essentially, in our museum, we have a lot of original posters from the films. We have set pieces, props, things along those lines, donated by the family, that make it very, very unique. But kind of now going back, regressing, we're going to go to Philadelphia, the Lupin Film Company. So Sigmund Lupin was an optometrist who was fascinated with motion pictures, and basically he opened a studio in Philadelphia because that's where he was located, and built it up from about 1902, I think, to about, this is from 1910, the shot in the middle, that was called Lupinville. It was a big studio that he built, and it was really one of the major motion picture production companies in the United States and in the world. Again, the problem was the cold. Even though they were under roof there, the place wasn't heated. It was freezing cold in the winter. So he came down, or he didn't personally, but they opened up a studio on Riverside Avenue in the Riverside section of Jacksonville. And they had bought it was I think a vacant, what was the old yacht club, the Riverside Yacht Club, just a small building, and they worked out of that, and they quickly built an open air stage behind it that you can see on the right, and you can see the muslin awning there. But this Riverside, beautiful area. You can just imagine what these wealthy people thought about having a kind of a film company just down the street as a neighbor. It was, who knows what the dynamics were. Oh, now here I am, larger than life. So my wife Betsy and I moved down here. And I tell Betsy, I have to go find out where the Lupin Studios were. I have to go where it was. So I go get my car, put 750 Riverside Avenue in the GPS, and it takes me to the underpass of the what is it, the Fuller Warren Bridge, going 95. So, okay, well, did my selfie, probably put it up on Facebook, that kind of thing for all my film buddies. And so shortly thereafter, I meet this guy who's been living in Jacksonville a while, and he knows a thing or two, a guy named Wayne Wood. You know, if any people know him, you should. I mean, he should get involved in this organization if he's not. But anyway, I get to know Wayne, and I'm telling him about this, showing the picture. He says, that's a great picture of you, Jim. That's not where the Lubin studio was. And I said, well, Wayne, whoa. I know GPS can kind of screw up every now and then, but this is 750 Riverside Avenue, because I double-checked it. He said, yeah, that's what it is today, but in, I think it was 1928, the city renumbered Riverside Avenue. He said the actual location was about a quarter mile east on Riverside, same side of the street. And so he was kind enough to send me 1913 Sanborn insurance map. And it shows exactly where the Lubin studio was located, and exactly where the little yacht club building that they based things out of, even the back lot stage. And that's where the term back lot comes from. These small companies would buy an existing building, and behind it, on the lot, build an open-air stage. So that was their back lot. So, and then there are a couple other little buildings, looks like a tool shed, maybe an outhouse, I don't know. But that's where the Lubin Studios was located. It was in the parking lot, next to the Morgan & Morgan building. So it's really amazing. You drive through Jacksonville and you are passing film history and you don't even know it. It's amazing. So the biggest thing that came out of Lubin's involvement in Jacksonville was the start of Oliver Hardy's career. Oliver Hardy came from Milledgeville, Georgia, with the sole purpose of getting into films. And basically in Milledgeville, he was a young man, I think it was the very early 20s. He managed the local movie theater. And when I say manage, he did everything. He took tickets, he sold concessions, he was up in the projection booth projecting the films. And as he's projecting the films, he's watching the films, and he's thinking, I could do better than that. And so he came down here, got into films, and he was off and running. So his nickname was Babe. And some of you may know the story. In Riverside, just down, really around the corner from the studio, he'd go for a morning shave with other actors. And there was an Italian barber who really liked him. And basically, he'd do the shave, and then afterwards, he'd like do the talcum powder and all that, and like, sweet baby, nice baby, kind of thing. And so all these other guys are started calling Baby, and then it turned into Babe. He loved the nickname. He kept that nickname till the day he died, and he's even billed in films, in ads, as Babe Hardy. So very, very interesting. But what happened around 1915, 1916 timeframe, Lubin ran into financial difficulties. With the World War I cranking up, foreign distribution was drying up, which they relied on quite heavily. So they pulled the plug on the Lubin studio, and a little company called Vim Comedy Company purchased the property, and Oliver Hardy went to work for them. So he's going to work on the same lot as he did with Lubin. Now that's Oliver Hardy. And a comedian very popular at the time, Kate Price was her name. They are sitting on Riverside Drive, looking across the street from the studio, and that's the Champlin Mansion behind them that's no longer there. Now it's the Florida Blue Building. So that's what stands there now. So that just gives you some perspective of how close that location was. So at Vim, Oliver Hardy was again, Babe Hardy. Oliver Hardy was teamed with a guy by the name of Billy Rouge, he was an acrobat on the stage who went into films. He was okay. He was sort of funny, not as good as Hardy by any means. And so they appeared as a team. This is kind of like forerunner to Laurel and Hardy, sort of. And they put out films like An Aerial Joyride. And what is interesting, this film really kind of gets across the importance of Jacksonville to the film industry and the film industry to Jacksonville. So I kind of got ahead of myself. I'm going to take those off right now. So basically, this film, like other films made in Jacksonville, they were distributed really head-to-head with the product coming out of Los Angeles. They were marketed, they were distributed, and they did very, very well. Not just here, but also overseas. Some surviving prints of film, sometimes there was only one print of film that has made it through all these years, and it's in an archive over in Europe or whatever. And you basically see these films before restoration, and they have French titles, they have Czechoslovakian, even Russian titles. So these films were a worldwide kind of, not phenomena, but worldwide product. What is fascinating about these films is so many of them were shot outdoors. So An Aerial Joyride was shot entirely outdoors. But what you see here up in the upper left is something called the Jacksonville Electric Garage. And I think, I'm working on a locations book, I think I've located where that was and where it is. I think the building still exists. I have to check it out. Below it, you see the Claude Nolan Cadillac dealership on Main. You see Riverside Avenue behind Oliver Hardy and the woman he's riding with. You see the trolley tracks along it. You see the Jacksonville Zoo, the three ladies. That's when the zoo was located in Springfield, at Springfield Park. You just see all this motion going on, and they're not just well, you don't see it here, but you will in the two films I'm going to show. But basically, Jacksonville is moving, but it's moving like 110 years ago. And what's fascinating, on the bottom right, the second shot up, this is a downtown scene that looks, you see it on film, and it looks like downtown Manhattan. There are cars, there are trolley cars, there are pedestrians, there are even like horse-drawn carts. And it was just a bustle of activity. And I've been able to track down that this was looking north on Main Street between Bay and Forsyth. You look at it today, this is from Google, and there's one lone pedestrian crossing the street, and he almost looks embarrassed to be doing so. It's just, in doing this locations book, it's fascinating because I'm pinpointing where these different scenes were shot. Jacksonville has so many parking garages. I don't know where all the cars are coming from. It's just amazing. So, anyway, so at the Vim Comedy Company, Plump and Run, Oliver Hardy, Billy Rouge were not the only comedy team. There was another comedy team of Bobby Burns and Walter Stahl, known as Pokes and Jabs. And both Burns and Stahl, they came down to Jacksonville they were both working up in Philadelphia for the Lubin Company. They came down, I think, around 1912-ish. They weren't teamed then. They appeared in little light comedies that Lubin was making. But when Lubin left town and Vim took over, they teamed up as Pokes and Jabs. And what we're going to watch are two Pokes and Jabs comedies tonight that'll give you a feel for these guys and what Jacksonville looked like 110 years ago. But it's just fascinating, the history. So the first film that we're going to see is Pokes and Jabs in Ups and Downs. And a lot of it was shot in Riverside Park. So you're going to see Riverside Park from this was made in 1915. And the fellow in the upper middle is Oliver Hardy, Babe Hardy. And what's significant is this is the earliest Vim comedy that exists, that's been found of him in it. But he's what's called playing a heavy. And heavies were villains. They were the people who really were after the comedy, the lead comedian, playing not so nice guys. But they called them heavy because it was heavy makeup they wore. It was a heavy mustache, heavy eyebrows. But he took this isn't the only type of role he played when he was down here in Jacksonville, but after leaving Jacksonville, that was a stock and trade for about 8 years supporting other comedians. He left in 1917, but he teamed with Stan Laurel in 1927. During that interim, he played probably 70 to 80% of his roles were playing heavies. The lobby card on the left is from a Larry Seaman comedy. Larry Seaman at one time was as big as Chaplin in popularity. A guy named Jimmy Aubrey on the lower left. It looks like Hardy is strangling Charlie Chaplin, but he's not. That's actually a Charlie Chaplin imitator, Billy West, who I'll talk about in a minute. On the right is really a fluke of film history. In 1921, in a comedy called The Lucky Dog, which was a Stan Laurel comedy, Hardy was hired to play the heavy. And this was a one-off. Basically, they shot the film, released the film, and then they both went their separate ways. Hardy appeared in films 100%. Stan Laurel was alternating between film and vaudeville until about the 1923-24 time frame. But this film still exists, and it's very, very interesting to see. So, Billy West. Let's get to Billy West. Billy West is important because he was a Charlie Chaplin imitator, and you're probably thinking, why would I want to see a Charlie Chaplin imitator when I could see Charlie Chaplin? Well, it was all economics. The Chaplin product was very high priced. He was incredibly high priced because he was the best of the best. And so the big city theaters, they could afford that. But the small towns, the rural theaters in farm country, that kind of thing, they couldn't afford it. So next best thing, they pay a lower price for rental and they get Billy West. And even Charlie Chaplin took it as a compliment that this guy was doing this, so he didn't take offense or sue him or anything. But Billy West worked here with Hardy in Jacksonville in 1917. They worked out of the Thanhauser company that I mentioned in Springfield. They had left town and rented the studio that they were in to the King B Comedies. And so they made 5 films here. 3 of them still exist. The other 2, who knows what happened to. But I'm going to talk about the villain because it's a very good example of why the film folks got kind of booted out of town. So back then, a film company, to my knowledge, a film company could go out and shoot anywhere at any time in the city without getting a shooting permit, which is required now. But basically, they just show up at a location, do their thing. And it was a little on the disruptive side. So this location here from the villain, Hardy is playing this heavy-set girl. He's in drag the whole film. That's Hardy. He wasn't into the heavy roles yet. So, but this was shot. I've pinpointed it on the bank of the Stinson Park over in the Ortega area. And so they get in this boat. It was a breakaway boat that they go out. I guess he's wooing Hardy. And this other motorboat comes by and slices it in 2, and Hardy goes into the drink, so does Billy West. And when the scene was done, this breakaway boat, it probably sunk to the bottom, motor and engine oil and everything. I because I don't think the film company got divers to go down to retrieve it and get it out of there. So those kind of things weren't really cool. And this is a very good example. This was shot of track this now because it's right next to Stinson Park. This was the Ortega Bridge back in 1917. And it was a wooden structure. I've compared it with postcards from the era, plus it has the trolley tracks down it. So this is looking south on the bridge. And this was a scene where essentially Billy West, who's the villain, is supposed to be in this prop jail, and for some reason they're going to put him on the cart and dump him over the bridge. So to get this scene, knowing that no city permits are required, probably one member of the crew got on one side of the bridge, the other on the other, stopped traffic. So if you want to go across the bridge, you're probably like, what's going on here? So while they're filming this, it even gets worse when they're throwing the jail over the side of the bridge. They were to throw it over the rail. Well, it went through the rail. You can see it through the rail. So they're damaging city property. So it just didn't. So this was the last film that Oliver Hardy and Billy West made in Jacksonville. I'm not saying they got kicked out because of this film, but that's kind of indicative of what went on. It was a clash of cultures. The film people, they were out there. And the folks living in Jacksonville, more conservative. And it's like, you know, the income of money coming into the city just isn't worth the hassle. So the second film that we're going to see is another Pokes and Jabs comedy. This one was done, that's not a Vim comedy, you'll notice. It was the Jaxon Film, I can't read corporation or company, but essentially Vim went out of business after a year. Basically, I mean, Eagle Films after a year. The Lubin, they left. So Vim, after a year, they go kaput. And the reason was Oliver Hardy, who was a star comedian with them, somehow he discovered that all the actors were being shortchanged on the payroll. There was some embezzlement going on, whether it was here in Jacksonville or at their financial operation up in New York. It was never determined, but essentially he let the authorities know, gets out in public, so Vim shuts down. And that's when Hardy went with Billy West to King Big. But what's fascinating about this film that you're going to see called Jolly Tars is you're going to see the 1917 Duval County Fair. You are going to see the ostrich farm at Dixieland Park with the ostriches actually moving. And you're going to see the Clyde Line docks with a couple of their steamers in there. So it's just fascinating to see these films and see Jacksonville come alive. I mean, in doing this locations book, I'm learning the city inside now as a relative newcomer, 4 years, but the city I'm learning is 110 years old. So it's kind of amazing to see the changes. Some changes, and then other locations you see, they're just like they were when they were shot that long ago. So the film, this is a little commercial, the films that we're going to see are courtesy of a company called Split Reel. Rob Stone is a personal friend of mine. He retired last year from the Library of Congress. He was their curator of the moving image. He wrote a book about the Vim Comedy Company, the ins and outs of it. And that's a middle book, the Pokes and Jabs. Picture book is fascinating because it contains personal scrapbook photos of different actors who appeared in film here in Jacksonville, Babe Hardy included. And then the two films come from the Pokes and Jabs DVD Blu-ray. So enough of the commercial. Next year, if I'm ever invited back, I'll probably be selling timeshares. Oh, just one other. So essentially, Norman Studios, if you're not familiar with us, please stop by. We're open right now the first and third Saturday of every month from 11 to 3 p.m. Again, we're all volunteer. We're building up a docent program. Hopefully we got more volunteers where we can open up every Saturday. We're going to be doing film screenings coming up. So lots going to be done, and we really appreciate the support of the city in keeping this going. So with that, I've concluded my presentation, and let's watch some films.
So thanks to Jim Kerkhoff for that programming, and if he's available, if there are any questions for him, another round of applause for him. Are there questions or comments for Jim? Yes, Beth.
Hi, I'm very interested in the preservation of the historic, the architectural history. I'm Beth Asbury, and I'm very interested in the preservation of the architectural history of Jacksonville. I'm curious about the financing side of the preservation of those beautiful buildings in Arlington. How is it funded?
That I could not tell you.
That's a question for Barbara.
Yeah. Barbara, can you answer that in terms of, let me hand this to you.
So the funding for the buildings, Norman Studios was all by the city and also the state.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Use the microphone, please.
why the film studios faded in Jacksonville. The stories were floating around that the conservative elements in town didn't like them. You alluded to that. Is there any truth to that? And then could have Jacksonville really been the Hollywood of the East Coast?
Well, once was the Hollywood of everything, but that was only for a few years, from about 1908 to about 1912-13, because Los Angeles was getting up and running. And the reason why Los Angeles, people had moved out there, which was like a 3-4 day train trip from the East Coast, New York, where the money was out there, was because, as I alluded to, or didn't allude to, mentioned in my comments, was Edison had held the patents on all his inventions. He licensed them. So these filmmakers weren't the most upright folks, and they wanted to make some money, so they wanted to use Edison's equipment, but not paying. So they went to Los Angeles, figuring the farther away from Edison and his trust, the better. And even if they come after them, which they did, basically they just run across to Tijuana, hang out, you know, wait for them to go back to New York, and they go about their business. But in terms of What happened in Jacksonville, the film folks wore out their welcome. It was basically, the environment here was a clash of cultures. It was a very conservative town, Bible Belt, Deep South. The film people, they were out there. These people had been on the stage, toured the country, especially the actors, toured the country. They were a little more loosey-goosey, and the cultures just didn't jive. And again, the shooting of these films, they did things where they recruited in the newspaper for people to come downtown to a certain corner at a certain time on a certain day because we were going to shoot a crowd scene. It was going to be a mob scene. Well, it turned into a real mob because there were like 1,000-some people. They were breaking store windows, all this other kind of stuff. They were driving cars off of the pier into the St. Johns River. I mean, it's just things like that which did not endear the film people. And plus by 1917, which is when it really started fading down, it went from about 1917 to 1920, because Henry Clouthier actually in 17 opened a studio up in Springfield. But that was at the tail end, so there was some work done there, but by 1920, it all went out to Los Angeles. And the thing is, if Jacksonville had really prospered alongside Los Angeles and Hollywood, we probably would never have the team Laurel and Hardy, because Oliver Hardy, Babe Hardy, loved it here in Jacksonville. It's very interesting because once he left, he never ever returned. But I was very fortunate in the mid-70s to mid-80s to be going out to Los Angeles on projects. So rather than going to like Knott's Berry Farm or the La Brea Tar Pits, I'm going to look up different people who worked with Laurel and Hardy. I got to meet his wife, his widow, Lucille, who was she was a script girl on one of their films. And I talked to her one time on one of these visits, asked her about, did Oliver Hardy ever mention Jacksonville? And she lit up. He loved it there. He loved it there. He said those were some of the happiest years of his life. It was basically for him, it was like going to college. This is where he learned his craft, and then he moved on. So if Jacksonville hadn't said goodbye to the film industry, probably Laurel and Hardy would not have happened. Another question?
I've only lived in Jacksonville since March of 2018, so a lot of things are new to me. But one thing that I learned is that in addition to the Norman Studios, Jacksonville also was kind of a hotbed for the entertainment industry in terms of the musicians, the jazz greats that came here, and some of these venues I think have already been torn down. I don't know how many of them are still known and in existence. You know, maybe the structure's not in good repair or whatever. Can you envision using the Norman Studios project that you're involved with and expanding that into a greater interest of promoting and rediscovering and protecting the existing entertainment venues that go beyond the movie industry and into the music and the nightclub scene and that sort of thing that's part of Jacksonville's lost legacy?
Well, our mission, I can't speak for the organization, but our mission is preserving Jacksonville's silent film legacy. So that is our focus. Now we're going to be having events at the museum in the Rita Reagan set building, which is the larger building behind the main building that the museum is in. Musical venues will be done there, but I really couldn't speak to our kind of diversifying into that end of things. But you're right, what I'm learning about Jacksonville, it was huge in terms of the entertainment industry. And one of my discoveries in doing these locations, around here there's a film called Behind the Footlights, which was a Pokes and Jabs Vim comedy. And I'm very proud of this. So I go to Wayne, I said, Wayne, I have figured out the theater that this was shot in. It was all shot at a theater, in the front of the theater, ticket booth, and then inside the theater. And so I send Wayne an email with some photos and all that. And I said, this is the theater. He said, Jerry, it may be wishful thinking on your part. I'm going, well, I'm pretty sure this is it. So I go back, I look at all the stills and all this other kind of stuff. I sent him a note back, no, Wayne, I'm 101% certain this is it. And it was the Strand Theater in the La Villa section of town, which was an all-black theater. But in this film, it's all white actors in this theater. He said, Jim, you're right. I thought, wow. Wow, it took my breath away. So it was the Strand Theater. That'll all be in my book when it comes out a couple of years from now, however long it takes. But yeah, and what I've learned about the Strand Theater, that was huge in terms of entertainment in Jacksonville back in that day.
Yeah, in mentioning La Villa, it was basically torn down by Flagler when he did the railroad, and then in subsequent years when I-95 came through. Do you think any of that construction had anything to do with the early demise of the film studios?
Well, the film studios, they just sort of disintegrated because a lot of these film studios were like the Lubin studio, where a company would come to town, they'd buy an existing property, there'd be a small building on that property, they'd build an open-air stage behind it, and that was fine. That's where Norman Studios was incredibly unique, because when Eagle Film City, when it was built, they called it Eagle Film City because they wanted it to rival what was being done by Carl Laemmle out in Los Angeles, Universal City. And so their vision was very grand. They just didn't have the financial backing. But a lot of these small companies, they were sort of fly-by-night, so they would be there for a year, 2 years, and then financially couldn't cut it, and for whatever reason, belly up. There we go. One more question.
I may be loud enough.
Okay.
In both of these film clips, except for toward the end of the second one, which had some major blemishes at the end, these films are 100 years old.
Mm-hmm.
How did they manage to be in such, for the most part, such pristine shape for being run through, I'm assuming, projector somewhere, and yet not full of all kinds of scratches? And I did see splices. I saw a lot of what looked like imperfections of, I guess, the emulsion from maybe the original film. How does this stuff, these older films, how have they maintained a pretty good imagery after 100 years? And how many prints of each of these films are still available, hiding somewhere? I'm asking a very broad question, and it may be a whole new topic, but your thoughts?
Sure. No, very quickly, the deterioration at the end of the second film, where you see all those kind of weird images, that's called hypodeterioration. And that was the film stock that these were shot on was a nitrate base. And it's very dangerous. It's flammable. It could catch fire. And actually, at Norman Studio Silent Film Museum, we have the original film vault that the Eagle Film Company built to protect against that. I don't think anything ever happened in there, but if you come and visit us, we had to open up the back end for a walkthrough. You can see how thick the brickwork is, like you're standing in a pizza oven. But essentially, that was, and that happens, unfortunately, has happened too much with these films that you see maybe at the front end or the latter end, just this gobbledygook of images happening. But a lot of these films that are pristine were stored. They were stored nicely and properly, and by fluke or by design, survived. And some of the prints that the Library of Congress has, I've been up there many times in Culpeper, Virginia, which is where their vaults are, and you go into the vaults, and this is where they have, I think they have the original camera negative from the Great Train Robbery, which is a classic early film. Basically, they're stored in temperature-controlled conditions, and you have to put on a jacket and hat to go down there. So it's a fluke. The film that Richard Norman made, The Flying Ace, is the only surviving film of his that is viewable, and it's a beautiful print. The family preserved it somehow. I don't know how they did it, but it's now housed. They donated it to the Library of Congress. It's housed there, and it's on the Library of Congress National Film Registry, basically, which makes it guaranteed it will be preserved as a cultural treasure.
And a little bit of a follow-on, aren't these nitrate-based films, they're very flammable and have to be handled, as you know. Is the Library of Congress involved in a major duplication process to digitize the films so that they won't deteriorate anymore? And if anything, and of course you can store a film on a $5 thumb drive. Are we, as a society, are we making inroads on making this stuff available, both in terms of storage and availability?
In a word, yes. Basically, the Library of Congress, with Rob Stone I mentioned, was the curator of the moving image. Before he retired, he loves Jacksonville, the history of filmmaking in Jacksonville. As the curator, he was going through the list of films that are on nitrate in their vaults, and he was queuing up the Jacksonville-related films. And he got transferred probably 2/3, maybe 3/4 of their holdings of Jacksonville-related films. The two that we saw tonight were Library of Congress prints. Those were transferred from nitrate and digitized. So basically, that's the way they're being preserved. And yes, there's a market for these. The DVD, Blu-ray of Pokes and Jabs. Who thought, oh boy, I would love a Pokes and Jabs DVD. But no, these little films are coming out. People are enjoying them again. And it's really kind of interesting. I find it interesting.
Thanks to Jim. Thanks to his colleagues, the board members, the volunteers, to Barbara Wego with the Norman Studios organization. Thanks to all the great work they do for preserving this extraordinary Jacksonville story. Thanks to all of you for joining us for this program here this evening. We appreciate the support that we receive from our philanthropic supporters, from the Cultural Council of Greater Jacksonville, and from our members, which I hope includes many of you. If you are not yet a member of the Jacksonville History Center, we have membership applications available at the front table, and we will be happy to remedy that condition as soon as possible. So I wish you all a great evening. Really appreciate everybody turning out on a bit of a soggy August evening. Thanks and take care.
I just wanted to make sure. is really good, Kate. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate that.
And this is a dumb question. That was Oliver Hardy in the first film, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, because they didn't have the cast.
Yeah. Your friend John Hyatt called about a week or two ago and sounded like he was going to be sending some stuff.
Oh, I brought some more over about a couple last week. Yeah, I missed you. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sean, your researcher, loved it.
Oh, great.
Are you going to be posting any of the pictures on social media? So those two ladies, the one, who's blonde and has a bag, she's doing a social media post, like, and asked me if I was a social media partner. But they wanted to, yeah, so she wanted to say, I'm not sure, it's Jack something.
I think it's Tina. It's Tina Solid. She's the one who fixed the fueler's clock.
Well,
So what does she need from us?
she was just asking if we were posting if I was a person in order to credit us if we have any pictures. Like that, yes, anything, but I knew that you needed it. Sorry.
No, that's great.
Do you need any help like striking things down? I've never done that before, so I
Let's
don't
talk to this one real quick. You could turn this off for me and
Well, we can do that, yeah.
know. Yeah, we can take that down.
Our camera died.
Off button. There's an off button.
No, they didn't. Okay.
How do you stop recording?